With War Without End, it's probably time we address the issue going on behind the scenes at Babylon 5. One of the problems struggled with during Season 1 revolved around Michael O'Hare. O'Hare suffered from paranoia and delusions, to the point that sometimes it interfered with his ability to perform for the show. JMS was in a bit of a bind. He and O'Hare got on very well together, but there was no denying that there was a problem there, being the lead actor on a show, especially in this time when American shows had episode runs in the 20s per season, was likely putting too much pressure on O'Hare and making things worse, and the sense was that it would be better for both the show and for O'Hare if the two parted ways. Now, that's not intended to be a polite euphemism for got canned. O'Hare was just as much on board with it as JMS was, and both showed that publicly. O'Hare, for instance, continued to support Babylon 5 in his public appearances even after he was off the show. And JMS repeatedly spoke well of O'Hare and defended him at length whenever there were rumors about his departure. But what most spoke of JMS's confidence that O'Hare was departing with no ill feelings and the chance to return for guest appearances was in Babylon Squared. The decision for the two to part ways took place while they were working on the final cut of that episode for broadcast, and the episode was running long. JMS could have chosen to cut the scene where Sinclair removes his helmet and reveals his face, a way to hedge his bets, and felt that the episode wouldn't have been substantially worse for that absence. It left the question of it dangling out there for a couple of years, sure, but that wasn't part of the intent, was the mystery of what was going on here. But he had such confidence that O'Hare would return for that he kept the scene in. This return would also mark the opportunity for Sinclair to say his goodbye on camera. JMS could have adapted things, could have had that moment at the start of Season 2 in the wake of the revelation about the Battle of the Line, but instead chose to have him whisked off to seemingly never be heard from again, which helped the show by feeding into the growing sinister sense around Earth's leadership, and makes Sinclair's return and departure that much more memorable. One last thing about O'Hare's condition. This was only recently brought to light. JMS had promised O'Hare that he'd bring it to his grave, but O'Hare had said to bring it to his own grave, that after O'Hare had passed on, he wanted the world to know and to raise awareness for the struggles that the mentally ill must overcome. So here we are in late Season 3, and for context, naturally this is going to be full of spoilers, so 3, 2, 1... Babylon 5 has cut off its ties with Earth. The Centauri have brutally enslaved the Narn. The galaxy is a rather messed up place at the moment. But you wouldn't know that where we begin, which is the majestic Minbari homeworld, or at least it's majestic in this part of it. I mean, even beautiful planets are going to have their crappy-looking parts, but this place is nice. And it's here where a message is delivered to this hooded individual, being delivered 900 years after it was written. But that's not really surprising if you've ever dealt with the post office. In this case, though, it was intentional. It was supposed to wait for this exact moment to be given and open, revealing it's a message specifically addressed to Jeffrey Sinclair, who is the hooded figure. That's what makes Hood so great. You get to do the great impressive reveal. Or you're in the Ku Klux Klan. But let's focus instead on our impressive reveal. It is impressive. Back on B5, they get the creepiest crank phone call. From themselves. A distress signal with Ivanova's voice is coming from the area where Babylon 4 disappeared, desperate and saying something is killing them. If they're anything like the audience, it's probably the suspense. After the titles, we learn that Sinclair is bowled over by what he's read, and he's leaving, with a cryptic remark that the Rangers are at the point where whatever happens to the two of them, they will go on and do whatever needs to be done. Which is good because there's a lot of doing that needs to be done, or else they're done for, done in and in doo-doo. A good example of this would be the contents of the distress signal, which is Ivanova's voice, despite her insistence that she has never sent such a signal. But Garibaldi says it's probably a message that she's going to send. It matches one of the visions from his time on Babylon 4, a fight here that they were clearly losing. He figures he should go investigate, and Sheridan agrees, since what the hell else do you do when a message from the future shows up? That's a wee bit curious. So, we need some merchandising, t-shirts, mugs. This station does not run on my good looks, you know. While Garibaldi is out checking it out, Sinclair arrives on B5, and Delenn laments what it means, repeating the Grey Council motto, a tie back to her plot in Babylon Squared, and insistence that this is where she is needed. These events are now proving that was more true than even she might have known. It turns out that she has a letter too, so per that she grabs Sheridan, Marcus, Ivanova, and the newly arrived Sinclair, and brings them to the White Star, after the intro scene between Sinclair and Sheridan, so we can have that moment of mutual respect to set the example for fandom that they will utterly ignore in their arguments. This is interrupted by Garibaldi's report. The cause of the time distortion is a stream of tachyons coming from Epsilon 3, a planet down below, and on that we get to see our old friend Zathras. This wasn't out of nowhere. Near the end of Season 2, in The Long Twilight Struggle, we heard Drawl calling for one of the assistants that tends to the Great Machine, and the name he called was Zathras. So now we know where he's from, sort of. Still don't know anything about his people other than that they're ugly, but in an endearing sort of way, you know. They're like the uncle who babysat you by giving you a beer to keep busy so he could keep watching Baywatch. Anyway, Sheridan and Sinclair head over together to the White Star for this trip that Delenn insists is so important. Sheridan wants to know why there was no advance warning about this thing and how Delenn knew that Sinclair would be here. But of course he doesn't get any answers out of Sinclair. Now, if you wanted to talk about how he puts his pants on, that we can discuss. Meanwhile, Garibaldi finally is able to get more of the signal, showing a bloody Ivanova in the midst of a full-on attack by shadow forces, while Garibaldi, in keeping with what he told Sinclair in the flash forward back in Babylon Squared, has rigged the reactor to explode. And that concludes our broadcast day. On the White Star, Delenn takes time to talk about the last Shadow War, which was 1,000 years ago and won with the help of the Vorlons, and an unexpected bit of help. After their main military base was destroyed, they discovered this station that would wind up being the launch platform that would ensure the war would end in victory rather than defeat, and that station was Babylon 4. Now that's already freaky, but here's where the deaky comes in. The Shadows recognized Babylon 4 when it was nearing completion, and thus planned to destroy it to ensure that it could never go back in time, thus trying to rewrite history. But they were stopped by the White Star. So to simplify, in the past, a ship from that present tried to destroy the station from that present to ensure it didn't go from the present to the past, but were stopped when a ship from the future came to the past, that is, not the distant past, but just the recent past, to destroy the ship to ensure the station would go into the future, but not this far into the future, just a bit into the future, to unload the people from the recent past into the more recent past before the station went into the distant past and the ship from the future returned to the future. So that clears that up. So the upshot of all of this is that they were the ones who stole Babylon 4 and brought it into the past. What they're seeing coming through that hole in time is an alternate possibility. If the Shadows hadn't lost the last war, they would be much more powerful and would overwhelm Babylon 5. Sending B4 back down only saves the past, it saves the future. That's good, Marcus. Whip that into a slogan and put it on some t-shirts. Sheridan has doubts, naturally, but Garibaldi reports that signal is dated 8 days from now. With that and Sinclair's encouragement, Sheridan finally goes along with this crazy plan, and that's when they rendezvous with a ship from Epsilon Theta, bringing the equipment they're going to need. They'll be putting a device in B4's power core to give the Great Machine something to lock onto so they can begin moving it through time, an extremely delicate and complex task that requires the most highly skilled personnel to implement.
Sorry, much apologizing.
Who are all apparently on their lunch break. This, of course, is Zathras, and Sinclair quickly recognizes him from his time on B4 2 years earlier. And Zathras knows who Sinclair is by reputation, and is quite honored, and then quickly confused.
Zathras, this is very important. When you meet me again, it will be me, but it won't be me now. So you're not to say anything to me that might change the past. Do you understand?
Oh yeah, there's no room for confusion in those instructions. Zathras is also pleased to meet Sheridan. It seems he's aware of the important roles that they will play in history, but was given instructions not to divulge too much, which shouldn't be a problem because he has trouble remembering a lot of it anyway. Before they head out, Sheridan orders Garibaldi to head back to B5 and to stay there. This was Sinclair's request, though, for reasons that he'll get into later. He's being all mysterious and shit. Hasn't even explained how he got that scar on his face. He's that mysterious. Zathras passes out these devices to protect them from the effects of the Tachyon waves, the kind of thing that killed that pilot back in Babylon Squared. You don't want to age to death or become your own grandparent or anything. So they time warp, and begin hunting for those shadow vessels, which aren't too hard to spot. It's not like they were expecting time travelers to show up and start shooting at them, although given that's precisely what happened during the last Shadow War, they really should have expected that. It's why Hitler lived so long, you know. After the first couple time travelers tried and failed to kill him, he would poke his head into every room looking for them, and then ducking back out of sight if he spotted someone in a silver suit holding a ray gun. While that's going on, Garibaldi has returned to B5, only to be confused that Sinclair came back and then ducked out on him, given all of their history and all that. He finds a message from Sinclair that's password protected, and when Garibaldi finally figures it out, Sinclair explains that he had to leave Garibaldi behind this time, that having come on the first trip to Babylon 4 and been exposed would mean if he came a second time he couldn't come back. But then you can't come back. What? Don't be silly, Oh, shit! Meanwhile, by which I mean 6 years ago, of course, the bomb is destroyed, but in the process, Sheridan disappeared. His stabilizer was hit by an angry ghost, I guess.
Very damaged. Zathras can never have anything nice.
I hear you, pal. Zathras figures that Sheridan has become unstuck in time, can be in the past or the future now, no way to know. But Sinclair insists that whatever happened to Sheridan, the reality is that now, in the wake of the EMP field's disruption of sensors, is the one chance that the White Star has to get to Babylon 4 undetected and thus complete its mission. It might seem cold, but Sinclair is still haunted by the vision of the future that he saw of Babylon 5's fall to the shadows. He knows that future is just one mistake away and refuses to risk making one. He insists, whatever's happened to Sheridan, he'd want them to finish the mission first. No, I don't. Sheridan has found himself in the future, a future where an aged Londo is now Emperor of the Centauri, a position he earned on his staunch kick-in-the-gut, punch-in-the-kidney platform. And it's good to see a politician keeping their campaign promises. Londo's incensed at Sheridan because he drove away the shadows but didn't bother dealing with their minions. Outside, the city is burning. Yes, this is in fact the same night that we saw Londo tell the story of the Earth-Minbari War in the Beginning, but before the kids show up, which is a pity because kids supported Londo for his knee-in-the-groin platform and would have liked to have seen that. But at least the rest of the crew have reached Babylon 4 and gotten aboard for the big mission, leading us into Part 2, which will continue on Wednesday.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
Zathras is used to being beast of burden to other people's needs. Very sad life. Probably have very sad death. But at least there is symmetry.